Despite a $2 million federal grant to test the state's backlog of rape kits, KARE 11 Investigates discovers hundreds of them have been destroyed without being tested. AJ Legault looks into why and how it's leaving survivors with little or no chance for justice.
An MMA fighter. Police and court records show Marcel McCullough also has a decade-long history.
He punched me.
Of punching below his weight.
I had blood all over my neck.
Leaving a trail of bruised and battered women from Minnesota to Florida to Colorado.
He just ripped her out of the car by her hair.
That's where he's now in prison for beating his girlfriend, breaking her arm.
She's screaming, crying.
Then fleeing in a wild, high-speed getaway in a stolen car.
I've got a car at 300 miles an hour, just crashed.
Before that, Marcel was a bouncer in 2011 at a downtown Minneapolis club when he met a college student and invited her to his Shenandoah Lane home in Plymouth.
And I had no idea about his past.
What the woman, who we're not identifying, did not know was McCullough had already been convicted of assault 4 times. In one charge, dropped as part of a plea deal, he was accused of asking a woman to have sex and, when she refused, punching her in the face. Back to our student, who claimed that night in Plymouth, McCullough raped her while she told him no and screamed loudly for him to stop.
There was really not much I could do. It was like trying to move a brick wall.
She reported to Plymouth police and went to North Memorial Hospital to get a rape exam.
I didn't want anyone to touch me, but I knew that's what had to be done to collect evidence.
Police reports show a detective called McCullough who said no one was raped, no one was sexually assaulted, but he refused to meet with investigators. For 10 months, they tried to catch up with him to serve search warrants to get his DNA. Despite the fact that part of the time he was behind bars on other charges here in Minnesota and even had this public fight in downtown Minneapolis, they never found him. He was never arrested. Without even testing the rape kit, the case was turned over to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, which declined to prosecute.
And now it's too late.
Too late. Our investigation discovered her case here in Plymouth is one of just hundreds across Minnesota where police destroyed untested rape kits. It happened in Bloomington, Eagan, Woodbury. Brainerd police destroyed dozens of untested rape kits, including Michelle Johnson's.
All the hope I had was the one thing I had left is gone. And
killing her hopes of one day getting justice.
It breaks my heart.
Camille Cooper is VP of RAIN, the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization.
It's sort of a slap in the face to the survivors. It's also in direct contravention to the federal guidelines for the retention of rape kits.
These guidelines, enacted in 2017 by the Department of Justice, recommend rape kits from uncharged or unsolved cases be kept for 50 years. But when KARE 11 did a spot check, surveying 36 of Minnesota's more than 400 law enforcement agencies, we discovered 219 untested rape kits destroyed, 98 of them since 2017. In some cases, kits were destroyed only weeks after a rape was reported.
It's shocking.
State Representative Kelly Moeller is also a prosecutor.
It is very upsetting to know that these kits have been destroyed and really eliminating the chance for justice for these survivors.
Police agencies like Brainerd that are destroying rape kits defend the practice, saying it happens most in cases like Michelle's.
Suspect in the case said this sex was consensual.
No.
Police call them consent cases, where both parties say sex occurred, so DNA won't solve their case. But that misses the big picture, says Duluth detective John Barrett.
It's not just to solve your own case, it may assist in another agency across the country that does not know who their perpetrator is.
Barrett is reinvestigating cases after Duluth DNA tested more than 500 old rape kits. He's making arrests, including in consent cases, and 3 suspects have been charged with multiple sex assaults.
From what you guys have seen, should cities be destroying kits?
I would say no. No.
Minnesota lawmakers tell KARE 11 they're planning to introduce legislation next week to mandate kits from all reported rapes be tested. So victims aren't forced to wonder, was their kit tested or just destroyed?
And it makes me so angry. Like, it's not okay.
At the Capitol today, sweeping changes introduced for how the state deals with rape kits.
It comes in the wake of KARE 11's 6-month investigation, The Untested, which exposed how victims are often left in the dark as their rape kits go untested. Reporter AJ Legault is here to explain what it all means. AJ?
Randy, no more lost rape kits, no more miscounted rape kits, no more untested and destroyed rape kits, and an enhanced ability to identify serial predators. That's what the legislation introduced today would mean for Minnesota.
This is historic sweeping change.
State Representative Marion O'Neill holding a Capitol press conference to announce a bipartisan mandatory rape kit testing bill.
Every single one. Everyone will be accounted for. Everyone will be tested. Finally, victims will have justice.
For months, KARE 11's been exposing how victims' rape kits have been miscounted, not tested, and some kits, like Michelle Johnson's, have even been destroyed.
And it makes me so angry. Like, it's not okay.
Not okay. That message to lawmakers appears to have been received loud and clear.
There is no excuse for any delay. We should not deny justice to any sexual assault survivors.
The proposed law, which sailed through a first hearing today, would also create a statewide tracking system so victims will no longer be left in the dark as to what happened to their kit.
Tracking and appropriate storage is critical for eliminating potential biases from our systems, creating accountability, transparency, and consistency.
And even though it is not yet law, Representative O'Neill is calling on all law enforcement in Minnesota to stop destroying rape kits.
I hope that practice has stopped. I think that the news reporting has been pretty explicit as to how impactful that is to a victim.
Well, the lawmakers say testing all kits will also revolutionize law enforcement's ability to use DNA to identify serial predators across jurisdictions. And just to show how much support this bill has, there are now 23 co-authors listed on it in the House, both Republicans and Democrats, saying, let's get this done.
Do you believe the wording of Minnesota's law is allowing rapists to go uncharged?
It's making it near impossible for us to successfully prosecute cases.
Nearly 1 in 10 women report being the victim of a drug or alcohol-facilitated rape. Yet investigative reporter AJ Legault discovers rapists in those types of cases are almost never brought to justice.
You can see them exiting the Monticello on the left. Now she is walking, as you can see. He's kind of holding her.
You're looking at dark and grainy surveillance video, never before seen publicly, that changed how rape is prosecuted, or we should say, not prosecuted in Minnesota.
You know, this was a case where I felt she was physically helpless.
Mark Erickson is Assistant Wright County Attorney. He tried the 2011 case, which centers on a wedding reception held at the Monticello Community Center. He walked us through the footage.
She collapses, and she looks like she's like on her knees and her hands. And he's clearly struggling to lift her up.
The man is the wedding photographer, Tane Finley. The woman, a 35-year-old mother of 2 and wedding guest.
It looks like he's almost dragging her.
They disappear inside his car for roughly 40 minutes.
Then they exit the car, and again she collapses.
A security guard approaches.
She's still lying there.
Erickson says Finley walks away and eventually leaves. Incoherent, unable to stand on her own, the woman had to be helped by other wedding guests to a hotel room.
The woman would later tell police she'd had 4 drinks over a period of several hours and was not drunk. She thought she'd been drugged, left with little memory of what happened here outside the community center.
The next day, she went to the hospital. A sex assault nurse performed a rape kit and found bruising and lacerations in her groin and upper thigh areas, and that she exhibited symptoms consistent with possible drug-facilitated assault. However, the BCA crime lab found no drugs in her system. That's not unusual. The most common date rape drugs metabolize extremely quickly and are rarely, if ever, detected, says former Ramsey County sex crimes prosecutor Corinne Long.
I am personally not aware of any investigation that has led to showing that GHB or one of the other common drugs was actually found in a toxicology examination.
In fact, when KARE 11 asked the BCA for data on two of the most common date rape drugs, we found in the last 20 years, they've gotten a hit for GHB only 6 times. And Rohypnol, they've never found it. The wedding photographer, when questioned by police, denied giving her anything or doing anything non-consensual. With the state lab finding no drugs and a victim who couldn't remember exactly what happened, the case likely would have been closed. But remember, there's this video showing the woman appearing to stumble and fall to the ground both before and after she was in Finley's car.
I mean, normally these cases you wouldn't have any kind of evidence like this.
Erickson brought sex assault charges against Finley, claiming the victim could not consent because she was physically helpless.
To me, the evidence is there.
After seeing the video, the jury agreed, convicting Finley of felony sex assault and gross misdemeanor non-consensual sexual contact. But the Minnesota Court of Appeals, in a ruling now known as State v. Finley, reversed the felony conviction. Why? It found, under Minnesota law, the woman did not meet the physically helpless standard. That ruling has had a profound impact on sexual assault cases across the state. In essence, telling prosecutors that even an extremely intoxicated victim has to be asleep or unconscious in order to prove that a suspect knew they were physically helpless.
We have to turn a bunch of these cases down presently because we don't have someone who, in essence, has passed out.
Mike Freeman is Hennepin County attorney. He recently alluded to the problem when discussing the University of Minnesota wrestlers under investigation for sexual assault.
We will not be filing any criminal charges in this case.
He says Minnesota needs to change the law and points to Wisconsin. Their law allows for convictions where an intoxicated or drug victim is not passed out.
I believe there are cases in which women are violated that aren't yet passed out.
How often does this issue come up with you and your prosecutors?
Too often.
Back to Monticello and that wedding reception. Tane Finley, the photographer, is still convicted of misdemeanor sex assault. But because of his case, victims are less likely to get justice in Minnesota today.
It seems you clearly believe a sexual assault case happened here or you wouldn't have charged it. But if this same case landed on your desk today, would you bring charges?
Very likely not.
The victim in the wedding reception case, who asked not to be identified, tells us Minnesota needs to change its law, which currently enables predators. I'm joined now by investigative journalist Brandon Stahl, who partnered on this reporting. And Brandon, you found there's another major legal loophole, if you will, in drugging cases that's preventing rapists from being charged.
That's absolutely right. What we found is that under Minnesota's law, dealing with the sexual assault of victims under the influence of drugs, prescription, or even alcohol requires them to have been administered without the victim's agreement.
So if you voluntarily drank too much or even took your own prescription medicine and someone sexually assaulted you in that vulnerable state, it's difficult to charge them under Minnesota's law?
That's exactly right, AJ. What happens is our investigation found in the last 5 years, the drugging law has only been used once to get a sexual assault conviction.
Just once. You can read our complete investigation, including about efforts now being made to change Minnesota's rape laws on KARE11.com.
It is appalling.
The man in Minnesota's most powerful office, today lending his voice to demand change for survivors of sexual assault.
I bet if you asked the average Minnesotan that they would be appalled and could not imagine.
Governor Tim Walz echoing a growing bipartisan call for a bill that requires all rape kits be tested. Just yesterday, KARE 11 exposed BCA figures showing less than half, just 46% of rapes reported in Minnesota result in a rape kit being tested. A fact that left the governor shaking his head.
Is that acceptable?
It is totally unacceptable.
Testing all rape kits and creating an online database for victims to track exactly what's happened with their kit comes with a cost. An estimated $7.2 million over the next 3 years. And in politics, there's an old saying, don't tell me what you support, show me your budget.
Are you planning to put funds in your budget proposal to cover all kits being tested?
Yes. You can expect to see that.
Well, the heavy toll of the COVID crisis is now extending to victims of sexual assault. Tonight, the latest chapter in KARE 11's ongoing investigation, The Untested. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault.
At Minnesota's capital, the focus is all pandemic policy.
And unless it's directly related to COVID, it doesn't really have a chance right now. In fact,
GOP State Representative Marion O'Neill has been the driving force behind rape kit reform efforts that would close loopholes. KARE 11's investigation exposed how survivors had kits going untested.
4 years. Over 4 years. Just sat there in a locker.
Miscounted.
I felt so dismissed.
Even destroyed.
It makes me so angry.
Minnesota was finally ready to require the testing of all kits for victims who report a sexual assault. It was a done deal. The legislature and the governor were on board.
and then this COVID crisis happened. I'm devastated.
A spokesperson for Governor Walz tells KARE 11 the governor supports rape kit reform in the legislature, and it remains in his supplemental budget. He wants to be able to sign it this session. However, O'Neill says all legislation with fiscal components has been shelved. That includes rape kit reforms, which had an estimated $7.2 million price tag over the next 3 years.
We can't test all the kits without money attached, and we simply cannot obligate the state to more spending. This is a tremendous blow to victims.
For KARE 11 Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.
Don't let COVID-19 kill all rape kit reform measures. That was the message today to state leaders from a coalition of law enforcement and sexual assault advocates. With the latest developments in KARE 11's ongoing investigation, The Untested, here's reporter AJ Legault.
There's no straight answers with anything.
Tiffany Bowe found out the hard way that getting answers about your rape kit after you report a sexual assault is easier said than done in Minnesota.
Now it's just been a back and forth thing with trying to get information and figure out where it's at.
Last year, KARE 11 took you on a journey with Tiffany. After countless phone calls, she was eventually told to drive 40 minutes from home to the Sherburne County Attorney's Office to sign a special form.
This is the form.
Her story helped spark legislation to create an online system so sexual assault survivors would be able to easily track what was happening with their kit.
Right now, we have a patchwork of inconsistent ways in which local communities are dealing with the actual storage and tracking.
Ramsey County Attorney John Choi, along with law enforcement partners and sexual assault advocates, held an online press conference urging state leaders to move forward with that tracking bill, as well as companion legislation to create centralized storage at the BCA of rape kits done at hospitals but not yet reported to law enforcement.
That would eliminate a lot of the backlogs and also eliminate the possibility that we may let one of these cases slip through the cracks and not do our due diligence for that victim.
KARE 11's investigation found rape kits going untested, miscounted, and even destroyed. A big component of the proposed reforms called for testing all kits in cases reported to law enforcement. But it came with a hefty price tag. Last week, State Representative Marion O'Neill, the bill's author, told KARE 11 the cost of battling COVID-19 has torpedoed that.
And unless it's directly related to COVID, it doesn't really have a chance right now.
But there is still a chance to make meaningful reforms that don't carry a huge financial requirement, said the group, now joining forces to push for the tracking and storage measures to move forward.
This legislation really, really does matter.
For KARE 11 Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.
The COVID-19 pandemic wreaks havoc on Minnesota's finances. A KARE 11 investigation finds a state agency wildly overestimating the cost of helping rape victims seek justice. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault with the latest in our year-long investigation, The Untested.
Untested.
4 years. Over 4 years. Just sat there in a locker.
Miscounted.
I felt so dismissed.
Destroyed.
It makes me so angry.
That's what KARE 11's investigations exposed happening to thousands of rape kits in Minnesota. State leaders listened.
It is time for victims to have justice.
A bill to require DNA testing of rape kits was introduced. It had wide bipartisan support and was on the fast track. Then COVID hit. Now there are concerns about what it will cost. Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington recently laid it out for lawmakers.
Our request for this proposal is for a total of $3.096 million in fiscal year 2021.
$3 million next year. $2 million every year after. How that figure was reached is spelled out in this fiscal note by the BCA. But there's a problem.
It seemed like an overestimation.
Camille Cooper is Vice President of Public Policy for RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network.
Your number one takeaway after looking at the fiscal note?
I didn't think they did the math right.
The BCA estimates their forensic laboratory will receive an additional 1,500 cases for testing per year. The BCA's Drew Evans told lawmakers that means hiring new scientists.
How many employees are you looking at adding for that?
It's 8 scientists for DNA, and then I believe 2 for the tracking portion.
In their budget estimate, the BCA said in 2019, statewide there were 2,763 reported rapes, but only 1,200 rape kits were submitted to test. So, BCA assumed they would receive an additional 1,500 cases for testing per year. They wrote, with this bill, all kits would be required to be submitted, which would include the vast majority of reported rape cases. But here's the issue. The BCA assumed that virtually all reported rape cases have a corresponding rape kit. Experts say that's never been true.
Those numbers are never going to match.
Cooper says that's in large part because rape kit exams need to be done within max 5 days of the assault, and many victims wait longer before reporting their rape.
The number of sexual assault kits is always going to be less than the total number of rapes reported.
The BCA repeatedly told KARE 11 there is no way they could tell how many cases included kits, so they had to plan accordingly. But what the BCA said couldn't be done was actually simple. KARE 11 just asked law enforcement around the state for data on how many reported rapes they had and how many of those actually had kits. Here's some examples. In 2018 and 2019, Duluth had 82 reported rapes, just 31 rape kits. Rochester, 209 reported rapes, 65 kits. St. Paul, 513 reported rapes, 349 rape kits. Our survey of 15 cities found just 49% of reported rapes have a corresponding rape kit. If that pattern holds, it means the BCA lab is looking at just 150 new rape kits to test per year, not 1,500. And the cost to taxpayers? Just a fraction of what the Public Safety Commissioner and BCA claimed.
And they're trying to make some pretty impactful reforms there in Minnesota. And one of the surest ways to kill a bill is to tack on a really high fiscal note.
For KARE 11 Investigates, reporting on The Untested, I'm AJ Legault.
Well, with just days left for lawmakers to vote and financial concerns mounting, a KARE 11 investigation finds the state crime lab may still be overestimating the number of rape kits it will be required to test if new reform legislation is passed. Here's reporter AJ Legault with the update to our continuing investigation, The Untested.
Nobody's raised this concern prior to this report.
That's State Representative Kelly Moeller responding to KARE 11's investigation last week that raised serious questions about the accuracy of the BCA's $7.2 million budget estimate for a proposed new law requiring rape kits be DNA tested. The BCA director said much of that money would be needed to hire new scientists for the crime lab to test the additional kits.
8 scientists for DNA, and then I believe 2 for the tracking portion, which are technicians.
But when KARE 11 surveyed law enforcement across the state, we discovered less than half of reported rapes actually have corresponding kits. So the number of new tests would likely be far less than the 1,500 BCA claimed. After KARE 11's report, lawmakers asked the Legislative Budget Office to review the BCA's fiscal note. The LBO quickly found the BCA's assumptions about the number of kits that would be tested are reasonable.
Everybody wants to get this right because at the end of the day, this is about justice for victims of rape and for survivors to get justice.
Meanwhile, BCA Director Drew Evans fired back, sending this letter to lawmakers stating our report falsely alleged they had inflated the cost of rape kit testing. Evans writes there were additional considerations that informed their analysis. He cites a Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, MINCASA, survey about exam billings from 2016 that indicated statewide there were 2,337 sexual assault exams performed, far more than the 1,200 kits the crime lab tests on average per year. But there's still a problem. That MINCASA survey included rape exams not just for victims who reported to police, but also for those who chose not to and did not consent to having their kits tested. How often does that happen? The BCA states in their letter at least 800 to 1,000 kits are collected from unreported rapes annually. So let's do some simple math. Take the 2,337 rape exams performed. We'll be conservative and subtract 800 unreported exams. Subtract the 1,200 kits the BCA already tests per year, and you're left with 337 new kits needing DNA testing. Still, a far cry from the 1,500 new tests the BCA wants taxpayers to fund them for.
We don't have any money.
In a hearing today, lawmakers raised concern about the cost, given what COVID has done to the state's finances.
I just don't think that this is something that we can afford to do.
This leaves lots of questions lawmakers now need to sort out before their session ends this coming Sunday at midnight.
A pandemic should not mean that a rapist gets away with raping folks. I think everyone can agree on that.
You're watching what is likely a first.
We have a bonding bill.
A Democratic governor signs a $1.8 billion bonding bill, and a Republican state legislator describes it this way.
It was, in my view, kind of miraculous that it actually happened.
That's because that giant stack of documents contains something lawmakers on both sides of the political divide agree is a win.
This is a huge victory for survivors of sexual assault.
A last-minute addition to that bonding bill mandated and provided funding to ensure, from now on, all rape kits in cases reported to the police are DNA tested. No longer will they be destroyed, not tested, left languishing on shelves, forgotten. An online database is also being created so survivors will be able to track the status of their sexual assault kit, no longer forced to spend hours on the phone, driving for miles, told to fill out official forms and wait.
This is the form.
The voices of the victims and the survivors have been incredibly loud since the beginning. And I know your investigative reporting really brought that to light as to how many, are not getting justice. And so their voices were critical for this to happen.
Voices like Tiffany Bowes.
4 years. Over 4 years. Just sat there in a locker.
Voices like Michelle Johnson's. Her rape kit was destroyed by the Brainerd PD without being tested.
And knowing that they didn't even bother, they didn't test it, they destroyed it, that angers me and it hurts me and it just kills me.
So many of the survivors who came forward did so bravely, knowing that it wouldn't necessarily impact their case, but they were doing that in order to make things better and prevent other sexual assaults.
The reforms had broad bipartisan support, but the COVID pandemic led to concerns the state could no longer afford to test all rape kits. It came down to the wire in the latest special session before lawmakers agreed The cost of not testing, of not holding rapists accountable, was simply too great.
That's really the bottom line. What's the cost of inaction here?
The new law goes into effect January 1st, 2021.